Steve is a former student for some of you newer students, and definitely a good friend of mine. We did a lot of philosophy stuff together. It was pretty cool having him around. Went to Asia together, which is also really awesome. And yeah, so he's been teaching English in Korea, South Korea, for 2 years. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So he's going to ask him some questions. But anyway, so do you want to talk about some of the logistics of getting your job?
Yeah, sure. So I designed this, design is a bit strong, but I went over like talking points before today, and I thought it would be a good idea to start with a couple of like statistics and like facts and details as to what happens when you try to get into teaching abroad, what you might have to go through, what you can expect your experience to be like once you're there, and yada yada yada, practical analytic kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I can't help too much with like the paperwork for applying because I'm a US citizen. So I did all of my paperwork through the like US pathway. I did have to get my degree apostilled by the Korean embassy in Montreal, which was horrible. And that was actually a really good introduction to what it's like to get information abroad. It's really, really hard because a lot of things aren't just online, because translating you know, like an Anglo language to Chinese language or Korean or Japanese or anything isn't as easy as clicking a button. And because of that, they don't translate a lot of really important information. If you want important information, you have to hear testimony from other people who have gone through a similar thing and posted about it online. There are problems with that. The first problem is that a lot of the rules and information that you need change, like every year. So post an incredibly informative and well-intentioned and detailed post from 2013 is not going to help you with much during the year of 2017 or 2015 when I applied. So you get into these situations where you get all this paperwork together and you dot your I's and cross your T's, and you go to send it in to the embassy consulate in Montreal. And then they give you a call saying, why have you given us most of this information? This isn't the way you do this. Who told you that this was the proper way to get things done? Except I'm paraphrasing. They're a lot less helpful than that. So watch out for that. You get a very similar thing happening when you go to South Korea. If you want information on things like you get a pension and getting a lump sum pension refund, you have to go through paperwork and go find offices, and all that information is really hard to get through. Even finding a bus schedule is super hard to figure out because, again, there is information that has been translated by people who were not paid to translate that information, but whether or not it's still relevant and applicable to your situation in South Korea, where everything changes like every 3 months, is anybody's guess. So you take a lot of gambles, you take a lot of risks, you take a lot of chances, and that's fun. That's a cool learning experience.
So earlier, sorry, I'm just gonna jump in.
No, it's good. I was thinking of something to say.
Yeah. So earlier you were talking, like, I've heard a bunch of times that teaching in South Korea is one of the better options as far as like students getting into it, as far as salary is concerned. But you mentioned that isn't necessarily the case, even though you'd be maybe making more money. But anyway, I'll let you go with that.
So the standard wage for working at a private academy with ironic quotes, in South Korea is 2.3 million won per month, which if you carry the decimal over 3 places is 2,300. That's more than you're going to get in most other countries teaching abroad, with the exception of China, I think. I know my old boss, Scottish David, told me that like very rapidly the ESL bubble is shrinking in South Korea and expanding in China. And part of the reason for that is it's hard working in South Korea because they have different ideas of work ethic. As far as they're concerned, they pay you money every month. In return for that, you will do as much work as humanly possible for them. That's not necessarily restricted to just teaching. That can also go into things like doing paperwork, completely pointless paperwork, written for people who cannot read what you are writing and thus will not read what you are writing. However, you are still expected to do that every single week or sometimes every single month, and sometimes like there are two different kinds of paperwork that you have to do every month while also doing all the weekly stuff. You're also responsible a lot of the time for organizing activities with really very little help aside from what people with seniority can tell you. We did this last year and it didn't work at all, so don't do that. Or this is what we did last year, and that was only after negotiating and arguing with people for about 2 months, so just do it this way. And that's really taxing. Teaching itself is already like incredibly taxing, just mentally. You have to be engaged. You have. You have to be engaged 24/7, like on. Every time you're in there with kids, you have to be in control. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be paying attention to all the kids, make sure that they're listening, make sure that they're actually understanding what you're trying to teach them, because it's really easy to tell if somebody's learning something or not learning it and just kind of pretending so that you leave them alone. And if you're not paying attention to that, you're not doing your job. If you're not doing your job, you're not helping the people you're responsible for helping. You're letting them down. So on top of all of that pressure, they expect you to do about another like 100 million things. And at the end of the day, like a 50-hour work week with very little pauses or respite in education is not worth, well, I got paid $2,500, but even like $2,300, and arguably, unless you're getting paid something like $3,500, I wouldn't call it worth all of that like work and expense and just pressure on yourself. That said, that's not necessarily what every single job in South Korea is like. I talked to a friend of my friend Kyle's who worked like 3 hours every day. That only one of those hours was spent teaching, and the other 2 hours he pretended to do paperwork and listen to podcasts. And he got paid almost as much as me. So it's a roll of the dice.
So I take it you're not going back.
Okay, so
Sorry, that was I nodded my head very quickly and tightened my lips. That's kind of my universal response to, I don't think I'm going to be pursuing that career path.
So was it an entire year that you did?
2 years.
2 years, an entire 2 years.
Yep. Similar schedule.
So just a question that's popping in my head is like, so you hadn't taught before. So how was that, like going into that role as being a teacher, because you were teaching kids as well, how was that for you? Just like learning how to actually actually work in classrooms?
Yeah. It's trial by fire, really. You either figure out how to do it or you don't. And when what was his name? Raja, the guy who came to replace me, he was asking me questions about like, how do you do all this and how do you manage this all at once? Like, getting all of these pages done, but making sure you're not going too far and keeping the kids like invested and like knowing how to do your time. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, you just kind of figure out how to do it after a while. I didn't even notice myself doing it. Like, I don't think I ever intentionally, like, consciously tried to become a better teacher, but just, there was this moment when I was reflecting upon my past experience and I thought to myself, I'm very good at this. Except it was like shock and amazement and like, I can quit this. I didn't do anything, it just happened.
What were the first few sessions like? Like just the first, like being thrown right into it?
Rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say I just made stuff up as I went along, but that was my entire teaching process and like methodology. So I just made stuff up on the spot, and then I got better and better and better at doing that.
Did you have materials to work with when you got there?
Yeah, you have materials, but it's not all necessarily like as simple as you will teach all of these things in the time allotted. Sometimes it's you have 1 page to teach for 45 minutes. Go. Sometimes it's you have 20 pages of incredibly technical questions to finish in 45 minutes. Go. And you just pick up like tips and tricks, and again you just come up with stuff on the spot, like I was always on my feet. I would go into a class planning to do one thing and then find out, oh, there are only 2 kids here. Nobody told me that. That's fun. And I would just have to come up with something, and I got really, really good at it. Yeah. Also, shout out to Rachel Barham for her Tesla 3000 course. If that's ever offered again, incredibly helpful. Did she get more Yugos than me?
It's only because you warmed them up so well.
Of course.
Okay, so one of the other things we talked about was one of the major frustrations working in that environment is that other cultures don't always operate with the same kind of like reasoning processes as ours. So like there's a lot of like authority from the top down, so you can't really question things that don't really make sense. Do you want to talk about that a bit? Or?
Yeah, because you actually reminded me of a point I probably should have pointed out in logistics. Females expecting to work in South Korea, it's not very fun. It's less fun than it is for males because that's the way their society kind of operates some of the time. I'd be inclined to say most of the time. It's not necessarily that true that every single South Korean you ever meet in your life is going to be a wee bit sexist. Cultural kind of norm, really, for males to always take authority and for females to do what the males say, unless it's one of those careers or choices or jobs that males don't get any input in, like childcare or yada yada yada. I can remember Scottish David's wife, Carla, let's call her Carla. Carla was a really wonderful lady. She didn't like me very much, but that's okay. And she was like really good at her job, and she was like really supportive of other teachers and her students and the staff. But the Korean staff always gave her the worst jobs. If it came out to an uneven workload between, it was the 4 of us at that time, she would get the most work by default. It was a very similar experience at my second job where I was working with Sarah. And Sarah is one of the best TESOL teachers I have ever met in my life. She's so much better at her job than I am. Because I get my job done, but I don't worry as much as I should about how the kids feel and whether or not kids are enjoying their day and how you can think of fun things to mix into lessons while still getting all of your work done. I don't bother with a lot of that. I just really want to get my work done, and if I make somebody laugh, okay, cool. But no, Sarah was really, really great about getting projects together and organizing and making sure the kids were having a good time. And the staff did not treat her nicely. They treated me more nicely. And I just told you that, like, kids having a good time is, like, low on my priority list, right? That doesn't make any sense. But because I'm a male and I'm older than her, I get preferential treatment. So you come into stuff like that. There are like many examples. I had another one with putting bags on the floor that wasn't quite as informational. You don't put your bags on the floor in South Korea, it's dirty. It's the social equivalent of putting your feet on the table here. It's dirty and you don't do it, but then it's like, well, what if there's no like convenient place to put my bag? Do I put it on top of my desk? That seems weird. So I didn't follow that one. See, not a good example.
Wait, do you mean it's dirty for your bag to put on the floor, or is it dirty for the floor to put your bag on it?
I don't know. That is an excellent question.
Okay, so you just mentioned working, like that it's frustrating sometimes, working with kids and like making them happy isn't a priority, but before when we were talking, you said that was the most redeeming part of the job. You said that like all of it could go away, but really the one part that made it worth it was working with the kids. And you mentioned that story with Bill. I don't know if you want to
Sure.
talk about that again.
So yeah, absolutely. Despite what I just said about, I don't really care if the kids have fun. I do care. It just wasn't high on my priorities list because of the kind of workload I had. If I tried to have too much fun with the kids, I would never get anything done, and then I would get really stressed out, and that wouldn't be fun for me or any of my coworkers. Not like that stopped me from being stressed out anyway. But yeah, working with kids, best part of the job. Easy, hands down. Kids are fun and cool, and they say neat things sometimes. Not necessarily about me. I had this thing for a while where... No, I had this thing until I stopped working there. I think actually in the last week too. Kids kept asking me if I was a girl. Like that. Like, teacher, are you a girl? No. But that wasn't, it was like, they weren't even trying to like grind into me, eh? Like they weren't trying to make fun of me. Because multiple kids over the course of a year and a half kept asking me that question with that same inflection and kind of look on their face. Like, teacher, are you a girl? And after a while, you just get kind of sick of it, so you're like, I don't know, dude, are you a girl? And then you move on with your life. But I was going to point out, so this was my last week there, there was this kid named Bill. And Bill wasn't a great student. It wasn't his priority to be like a great student. I remember I taught him in 2nd grade, and it was him, Eric, and Harry, also known as Hianu, but I wasn't allowed to call him Hianu, except sometimes. Sometimes I wasn't allowed to call him Harry. Nevertheless, they were always causing trouble in class, and they were generally pretty disruptive, so I had to at them a lot. But I ended up teaching him a year later, and the thing about Bill is that he wants to be a comedian when he grows up. As far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, he still wants to be a comedian. And it works for him because he's a really funny kid. There was this one day, he's funny even like using English as a second language. There was this one day I was teaching the class and I said to them, like, if you go up to a convenience store and you talk to the cashier, what kind of things do you think you would say? Show me comprehension test, right? How much do you already know so that I don't have to teach it to you? And Bill goes, teacher, like this, and he stands up. He's not supposed to stand up. He's supposed to stay in his seat. He stands up and he goes like this. And everybody's laughing, and I go, Bill, are you telling me every time you go into a convenience store, you walk up to the counter and you're like... But then the thing is, he goes and explains to me, like, no, teacher, you don't understand. Money, chocolate. And then you're kind of sitting there being like, that makes sense. That's so weird that it makes sense. Okay, Bill, no, that's not the correct answer. But you get a lot of little moments like that that just, they're not even just necessarily funny. There are moments where you're just super proud of kids because they're learning skills and you may or may not be responsible for them learning skills. You feel super proud because someone who's always been bossy and always has to tell other kids what to do and start fights that you have to deal with, suddenly learns that sharing is good. It is good to share with other kids because then Stephen doesn't have to yell at you. Like, oh. Right? When things like that click, and it's, yeah, exactly, give and take. Kindness, respect. Yeah?
That's nice.
That's an awesome story. I love it. But okay, so one other thing that you were talking about before was how like strangely like all experience works out to be helpful in the future, and so you had a story that was kind of relevant to that working.
Yeah, so the background for this kind of thought was coming from a liberal arts background as far as education is concerned. Which, when people ask you what you went to university for, and you tell them like, oh, literature, I studied books, like philosophy, I studied thinking about stuff. And they go, oh, it must be good, real easy to find a job with that, eh? It's like, yeah. Thanks for that. But, and like part of it is them just kind of like poking fun at you, but another aspect of it is this idea that if you can't demonstrate skill or ability or experience, it doesn't exist and it's not valuable. If you can't translate a skill or ability into the workforce, it's not doing anything for you and it's a complete waste of time and money. And that was something I struggled with a lot. Part of the reason I went to South Korea was because it required a degree. It required a degree so I could use my degree to do this thing, and then I would feel proud of myself. No, I didn't. But I did get over that concern of experience, because what I learned is that there's no such thing as useless experience in your life. Everything in all experiences you have can translate into something that can help you in the future. A really good example, I have a primary example and a secondary example. The secondary example is funny, but my primary example is that I studied philosophy as a minor. And one of the things you learn about in philosophy are, for example, Aristotle's principles of means that are conductive towards ends. Very logically, if you want to get something done, and you're sure that it's important to get that thing done, find the best way possible to do it. It's a super simple idea, but like before I studied that, that wasn't something I actively practiced in my life. Now that's something I actively practice in my life, and the thing about it is it made me really good at performing tasks. Because if I find that something I'm doing isn't conductive towards the end that I want, I change the means. It's not about doing things one way, it's about finding the best way to get something done with as little effort as possible while still maintaining quality. That's a very strong virtue and principle that I adhere to. And it's something I wouldn't practice if I hadn't learned it in university and paid attention to it. And it's useful in my career. Yeah. And there's tons of stuff like that. For example, secondary story. I worked at a call center across the way there as a telemarketer for a summer, and I hated it so much. Pretty sure what we were doing was illegal, nevertheless. I got really good at talking to people over the phone. Which, you know, before I went to South Korea, I thought, well, it's cool that I can talk to the phone now, but that was a complete waste of time. I barely saved any money and I felt miserable doing it. Like, I regret this decision that I made. But at my school, I ended up having to teach for 1 hour this thing called phone teaching. Disclaimer, complete waste of time. Phone teaching is where you call kids after they leave school, after they've already been at school for like almost 12 hours. And you call them on the phone and you say, "Hi, Eric." "Hi, teacher. How are you today?" "Good." "Good. Have you eaten dinner tonight?" "What?" "Have you eaten dinner?" "Oh. Okay, are you ready for your question this week? I had to do that 1 hour every single week for a year of my life. But the patience I had with not only making uncomfortable phone calls, but a series of uncomfortable phone calls was something that I was really, really good at. Because I'd had the experience beforehand. Experience transitions into abilities without you even knowing it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I thought your principle number one, your story number one, was funny how timely it is for us because we were just starting a new strategic planning thing for the university. And the whole thing about means and end and making sure that you even adjust the means to get to the end that you want is what we were just told by a consultant. One of our grads who was here visiting, it's just, I mean, it's basically, it's really, really interesting timing. Thank you.
Well, they didn't pay me millions for nothing. Jokes. I'm not gonna get out of that anymore.
So, okay. Okay, bear with me, guys.
Why did you guys let me up here?
Working on it. But okay, so we were gonna talk a little bit at the end about just like what it was like being a student at SSU for you as well, kind of like before this and that, so that we get a sense of before as well as after experience. So do you kind of want to just run with that, or do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, I went to university for this university. I went here, done scene speech, not a good principle for English teachers. For 4 years, I studied English, which was super cool because I like reading stories, and I was already really invested in like ironic quotes, canonical literature. So it just kind of went hand in hand with what I was already interested in. Got super into philosophy, and that took some weird turns. And for 4 years, I just kind of adjusted myself to, I don't know, like the world, I guess. like existing in one community for an extended period of time, because I'd never really had to try to do that before. And that was cool, and it taught me lots of valuable skills, which came from experience, which is always valuable. Right? You have no idea how hard it is for me to actually just sit in this chair and not pace back and forth in front of John. I always talk standing up, so whenever I'm just like kind of spitting, I'm compelled to up.
I think better when I'm moving, so I get that.
I also ramble a lot when I'm moving. Yeah.
Anyway.
I feel like some of you were like, you ramble a lot anyway, dude. But yeah.
It's good rambling.
It's funny rambling.
Yes. Anyway, okay, so I think we got like a few minutes left. Does anybody have any like specific questions?
Open Q&A! Q&A!
Robert?
Just a question about South Korea in general from a friend who came from South Korea and then from a rumor from other people who visited there. They tell me about this insane work ethic that South Koreans have, and I wondered, you kind of touched upon that earlier in your talk. Is that something really true? In South Korean society in general, is this a very, very extreme work ethic? And if so, how does that, what are the ramifications of that for social happiness and well-being?
Well, I can sum it up in the way it was expressed to me, which is super messed up. Disclaimer. So basically, somebody was talking to me about this, and they were Korean, and they said, so South Korea does not have any natural resources. People are our natural resources. We put, somebody's like, whoa, that doesn't sound right, right? Right! We put all of our time and our energy into developing our natural resources. People. Which, okay, I get where you're coming from, but when you say natural resources, I think of things like coal, where we burn coal until it's completely used up. And then the consequences of burning coal are released unto the world, and up until the past decade, we haven't really taken responsibility for the consequences of completely using up a resource without considering the consequences. So yeah, from their own perspective, their work ethic is incredibly strict. And in their perspective, it needs to be strict because without people being developed, they're not going to be able to survive and keep up this kind of economic plateau that they built for themselves. And one of the unfortunate things that they believe in South Korea is that the more time you put into something, or the more money you put into something, the better quality it's going to be. That's not true. Okay? Their idea is that if kids are primarily studying most of their lives, they will be better students. Now, Korean kids do score really well on like international like math and like science tests. But so do countries like in the Netherlands that spend like a quarter of that time in school. And in some cases, they've actually gotten better test results. But try telling a Korean person that the Korean way of doing things isn't right. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I guess the follow-on was, does this lead to a certain degree of depression, suicide, malaise, social malaise, or is it just something that's part of our culture, we're proud of it, and we go with it?
Nothing that manifests externally, because you don't manifest things externally in South Korea. If you have problems, they stay inside. If you have, arguments or you disagree with something, for the most part, until you're old enough to disagree with it, you keep it inside. And that even reflects so much as like external appearance is extremely important to them, to the point of absurdity. Everything external is fine and perfect and shiny and clean. Don't worry too much about what's on the inside, that's not important.
Part of what you're saying with it is there's not even really time to consider it. 'Cause
That helps, yeah.
You're pushing so hard, there's not really a lot of time to even ask those questions. Because you're pushing so hard, everybody is, right?
Yeah.
So there wouldn't necessarily be
Yeah.
an acknowledgement. It feels
Time
like
to
it's
process
okay.
them.
Yeah, it feels like it's okay, and it's a cultural working mechanism, like we have our own for other things as well, right?
So introspection is not a virtue.
Not unless it's conductive to getting work done. If you're thinking about how to build a building, for a building that's going to be built in the next hour, then yeah, your introspection is being well spent. Otherwise, you're just wasting time.
Just heard an amazing comment from another one of our grads on the west coast of the States, and he's a Toyota mechanic. And he said that there seems, in his opinion, there's a difference between Japanese philosophy in building cars and Korean philosophy in building cars. And he said that the Japanese companies like Toyota and Suzuki framed, they had I can't remember his name, or the word for it was a Japanese word, but it's the idea is that everything can be made more beautiful. And so the best design is not a design that you make new, it's that you take the older design and you keep shaping it and evolving it so it becomes better. And he said the way it manifests itself, he said, but in Korea it seems like the remake is more often the case. So he said, in the way it manifests itself is the car companies from Japan, the parts, although they're getting better, can still be used in an older vehicle, but not so much with the Korean cars.
Oh no, absolutely not. Yeah, that's actually a really good way of maybe summarizing their train of thought. It's about what you can do immediately. You don't worry too much about the long term. I actually had a girl in a debate class a while back tell me South Koreans were stupid precisely because they don't think in the long term. This was a South Korean girl. Yep, straight up. Right on.
Does anybody else have a question?
Would there be negative repercussions to the fact that she would say something like that in such a work-oriented society?
Not in our classrooms.
Okay.
Just because they enter a completely different atmosphere when they're with foreign teachers. And sometimes you feel like they're trying to take advantage of you, and sometimes they genuinely are. But sometimes it's actually they can interact with you in a way that they can't interact with anyone else in their society. Because they say things like that, and then I go, did you actually just say that? Right on. You know? That's not the kind of response you would get like anywhere else. And as far as like the class inside is concerned, like, no, they wouldn't really mind that she had said something like that. I think one time we tried to make the case that my school could be sued for copyright infringement because they were using the banners of several large American universities without permission. And they were totally excited to be like, teacher, can we really sue Polly? I'm like, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but kind of, maybe.
One more question.
We were talking earlier before lunch, and we were talking about some of the difficulties and impossibilities of integrating with another culture, right? You know, and the time spent to do that, because I lived in South Korea for a year as well, years ago. And so doing that, and there's lots of, the longer you spend in somewhere, you can encounter more and more points where your own culture just doesn't gel, right? Were there things for you when you were over there that you found as like some gems of the difference, right? When you said some things about Korean culture, about living in this other space within the wide spectrum of the culture, anything that you picked out that you were like, oh, and I did miss the first few minutes, so if you covered this already, let me know. Anything you picked out, you're like, wow, that's really neat. You know, I'm only kind of being exposed to that because I've spent some time here, and I kind of wish we would do that. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't work back in my personal culture. So anything that you encountered?
Yeah, I totally do, and I didn't think I was going to have one. It was going to be super awkward. I'm going to try to say it as fast as possible. So Koreans always share their food. Always, always, always share their food. And it just cuts so much on cost. It costs less to share food, with a lot of food, with all of your friends than everyone in ordering an individual meal. It's a really smart way to budget, and it's a very good way to interact with people, because then you don't go eating at a diner by yourself. You go with your friends so that you can get a huge meal and then just split it amongst you. It's very important for them that you always eat dinner together with people.
For the question of happiness and culture and satisfaction, that's maybe one of the areas where I most saw it, is over food and how they observed and experienced food together as a culture. Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna call it there just in case there's class right now. But anyway, thanks for coming, Steve.